We know from the Supreme Court of the United States of America that we have free speech. There are some exceptions to that, like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Let me tell you a story about how that happened to a real preacher of the past and what it can teach you about the providence and perfect timing of God. It says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them are the called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. There's an old saying that I go by. It says, too soon old and too late smart. Sometimes I think that applies to how we view God's timing in our lives. We want answers now, solutions yesterday, and miracles on our schedule. But God's providence, his loving care and guidance over our lives operates on a different clock than ours. Let me tell you about a young preacher named Charles Spurgeon in 1856. When he was just 22 years old, he was preaching in the Surrey Music Hall in London to a crowd of over 10,000 people. Suddenly, somebody in the balcony shouted fire. There was no fire, but panic spread like wildfire. People stampeded toward the exits. 7 people were killed in the crush, with dozens more injured. Spurgeon was devastated. He blamed himself, fell into a deep depression, and seriously considered quitting the ministry altogether. He couldn't understand why God would allow such a tragedy to happen during what should have been a time of great spiritual blessing. For weeks he struggled with doubt and despair, wondering if God had abandoned him. But here's the rest of the story. That terrible night became a turning point not just for Spurgeon, but for thousands of lives. The incident made headlines across England and beyond, bringing Spurgeon's name and ministry to international attention. More importantly, it broke something in his heart that needed to be broken. The young preacher, who had perhaps relied a bit too much on his own gifts and eloquence, learned to depend completely on God's grace. From that dark season came some of the most powerful preaching the world has ever heard. Spurgeon went on to become known as the Prince of Preachers, leading thousands to Christ and establishing an orphanage, a college, and countless other ministries. He would later say that God used that heartbreaking night to teach him that true ministry flows not from human strength, but from divine grace. God's providence isn't always comfortable. It rarely makes sense in the moment. Like a master weaver working on the backside of a tapestry, we see all the knots and loose threads and wonder what in the world he's doing. But God sees the finished picture. He's working all things together for good. Maybe you're in one of those seasons right now when nothing makes sense. Bills are piling up, relationships are strained, health is failing, dreams are crumbling. You're wondering, like that young preacher, if God has forgotten about you or if he's even paying attention. Let me remind you of something. God's never late. He's never early. He's never absent. His timing is perfect. Even when it doesn't feel perfect to us, sometimes he's preparing us for something greater than we could ever imagine. Sometimes he's protecting us from something we can't see. And sometimes he's simply reminding us that we're not in control. He is. And that's actually the best news we could hear. So today, when you're facing whatever you're facing, remember that you serve a God who knows the end from the beginning. He's writing your story, and he doesn't make mistakes. Trust his timing, even when you can't see his plan. After all, history is not just history, it's his story, and you're an important part of it. God bless you. I love you, but Jesus loves you so much more. Have a great night.